Good evening, all. We're about to begin tonight's proceedings, and we're going to have a word of prayer from Mr. Millington.
All right, good evening, all. Let us pray so we can stand. All right, so as we go to God in prayer this evening and welcome His presence and ask Him to be here with us. Dear God, Heavenly Father, we just want to give you thanks and praise for this day that you have made and all the blessings you have afforded us. You have brought us here safely, and we are eternally grateful for your blessings. And as we gather here this evening, we ask thy blessings upon this proceeding. We commit it to your hands. Bless the organizers, the Pharmacy Council, Medicinal Cannabis Authority. We just ask you to be with the presenters as they share their knowledge and experience with us, and hope that we will learn something new that we can take, that we can edify other persons with. So we commit this proceeding into your hands and ask your blessings. May it go smoothly according to your will. And those who are on their way, we pray that you grant them traveling mercies, that they may be with us safely. These prayers we ask in the name of their dear Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And as we stand in, don't sit, we will sing the national anthem of St. Vincent the Grenadine. St. Vincent, land so beautiful, with joyful hearts we pledge to thee all loyalty and love, and vow to keep you ever free. Whatever future brings, our faith will see us through. May peace reign from shore to shore, and God bless and keep us through. Hairuna, fair and blessed Isle, your mountains high, so clear and green, are home to me, though I may stray, a haven calm, serene. Whatever future brings, our faith will see us through. May peace reign from shore to shore, and God bless and keep us through. Our little sister islands are those gems of the lovely Grenadines. Upon their seas and golden sands, the sunshine ever beams. Whatever future brings, our faith will see us through. May peace reign from shore to shore, and God bless and keep us through.
Thank you. You may have your seats. By way of introduction, my name is Trisha Deschong. I'm co-opting member of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Pharmacy Council. Philosophers sometimes have said that the pursuit of knowledge is essential to human nature. Having honest and age-appropriate conversations about the use of any drug is important. Knowledge is indeed power. And the aim of this evening's event is to impart knowledge to those who need to know and those who are on a quest to know. Mrs. Joanne Ince-Jack, Chair of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Pharmacy Council, Mr. Levi Walker, Registrar of St. Vincent and the Grenadines Pharmacy Council, officials from the Medicinal Cannabis Authority, specially invited guests, guardians, caretakers, parents, audience, the youth, everyone, a warm welcome is extended to you. This evening's event is a product of calculated and intentional efforts of collaborating organizations with the interest of the public at heart, essentially to put persons, including the audience here this evening, in a better position to make informed decisions. There are very few topics that are tastier to talk about than edibles. The theme, the dangers of edibles and teen cannabis use, is timely, befitting, and intriguing. Believe me when I say there can be a real danger in consuming certain things and by certain persons. We all know that too well. We will no doubt hear more about this in the presentations which are to follow. We invite you then to listen, participate actively, and most of all, learn, relearn from the content presented to you this evening. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming. For those who are on the way, we pray that they would hasten their footsteps. And my wish for you, all of us this evening, is that we have an exciting learning experience. Thank you for your attention. So we noticed that some folks have just joined us. We want to again extend a warm welcome to you, and we do hope that you learn and you enjoy yourself on this journey tonight. Our first presentation will be done by Mrs. Joanne Ince-Jack. Just bear with me a moment, please. Mrs. Joanne Ince-Jack is a pharmacist by training. She holds a Bachelor of Pharmacy degree from the University of Technology in Jamaica. Mrs. Jack is an avid fan of anything pharmacy. She had vast experience in the art and science of preparing and dispensing medicines. When Mrs. Jack Ince is not testing out her culinary skills, she is tending to her vegetable garden. Mrs. Jack is a strong team player, and we have the distinguished honor tonight to present with the first presentation, Mrs. Joanne Ince-Jack. Please welcome her to the podium as she makes her presentation.
Good night again, once more. Protocol being established. I begin. Overview of the dangers of edibles and teen marijuana use. And this topic, is concerned to me after a few persons would have had to be hospitalized. So I thought it fitting that, this and part of the council to make that effort and with the authority. So, to start, okay. When parents think about their teen using marijuana, what do they picture? They picture joints, pipes, and bongs. Bongs is a filtration device for smoking, marijuana, tobacco, and sometimes some herbal substances. They do not imagine brownies, chocolate bars, and gummy bears. Parents need to know about the dangers of edibles, weed candy, and edible marijuana. This is the bong, which is also known as a water pipe. Now, to make edibles, marijuana is brewed into a tea or sometimes cooked. So you have the brownies, the cookies, and the candy as mentioned before. Hence, teens can consume sweets that contain tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC, the primary psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. Now, the results here is done in the USA. You know, it would be nice if sometimes we can do some research for ourselves so we can have some evidence-based medicine so we can go on. But I had to take these results from the studies done in USA indicating that teens were more likely to smoke marijuana than cigarettes. They not only smoke marijuana, they also eat it as well. Of more than 3,000 Los Angeles teens, 21% have tried edibles. Some teens consume edibles to reduce the likelihood of getting caught in school. One youth explained, so you can eat your brownie in class and the teachers don't even know. You're just eating a brownie. They're not going to snatch it out of your hand or even smell it. Edibles are also a go-to for those who do not like to smoke or have concerns about smoking. One male user explained that some may be concerned about rolling paper causing cancer of the lips. To continue with the results, a female non-user observed that most people at my school, quoting her, the men would actually smoke, but sometimes it would be that the girls eat brownies. Some male users reinforced this notion, indicating that the majority of the people who like edibles are the females at school, with one teen suggesting that some female users prefer edibles because they were too afraid to smoke. They don't want that smell on them. While female users describe edible use as a choice to minimize the risk of discovery at school, they also observe that smoking is different for a girl because people think, oh, she's a baddie. Some teens describe aspects of marijuana use related to smoking as stinky and unattractive, with male users suggesting that abstaining from marijuana use was attractive if it's coming from a female. To continue the results, youth reported that edibles can be purchased at school from other students who either make the edibles themselves or resell them after obtaining them from a dispensary. For example, one female user reported that a girl at her school sells marijuana-infused cupcakes for $5 each. One male non-user said that several students in his culinary class at school are there to learn how to cook in order to be able to produce edibles. When asked how youth manage to make marijuana-infused butter, can of butter, that is, which is often used to produce baked goods, some teens reported that teens either make their own or are able to access the butter purchased from dispensaries. One young woman noted that some teens at her school have access to edibles from dispensary to their older siblings who have medical marijuana cards. So that's another area. Some youth considered edibles from dispensaries safer and sometimes preferably because they are tested and done right. However, teens also acknowledge that the cost of edibles from dispensary was higher, which is why some teens make their own. One of the trade-offs with homemade edibles may be taste, as one youth reported who had a brownie which did not taste like brownie should taste. Now, because of the advent of the decriminalization and the legalization, pot entrepreneurs seek to profit from the creation and marketing of edible drugs. As a result, the market is expanding. So we have marijuana edibles, no smoke, no smell, reduce the chances of getting caught. Therefore, people who don't like these aspects of smoking marijuana may instead choose edibles. Marijuana edibles are popular with teens. In addition, teens believe they can get away with using edibles. Teens mistakenly believe that they can handle using edibles. In one survey, many youth had heard of teen deaths related to marijuana edibles. However, users were generally not concerned and felt that teens who could not handle edibles should not be consuming them. And these are many types of marijuana edibles. So I'm just giving a few examples, not touching the thing, it's just a small amount. Weed candy, like cannabis suckers, gum drops, gummy bears, pot cookies ranging from ginger snaps to chocolate chip cookies, cannabis milk chocolate, dark chocolate, and even toffee chocolate. Many more types: THC, laced honey, and flavored CBD oil. Cannabis-infused popcorn, candy corn, and popcorn toppings, and healthy pot granola, pot tea, and cannabis punch. These are some of the many edibles. Okay, to examine the dangers of edibles. When you look at edibles, you know, they generally have a sweet taste, colorfully packaged, and marketing schemes to attract youth. Because they are user-friendly, the dangers of edibles are magnified for this population. One of the biggest dangers of consuming edibles is the digestive time in the body, which falls a much longer high, 4 to 10 hours. So you can see how easily, that can be. It is also easier to overdose on edibles because a THC high results in the munchies. The munchies is really like if the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is a cannabinoid, binds to the cannabinoid receptor, which is either the type 1 or CB1, promoting overeating and weight gain. So we can see how this could be detrimental to most people, but also beneficial to those under medical conditions like with cancer and also associated with HIV, the wasting syndrome. And this is where the medical marijuana takes its part. Now, parents and policymakers, they need to educate the teens. Also the teachers and the communities. Before, we always look out for the other child in our community. That seems to be no more. And edibles could be made visibly distinctive so parents and teachers can recognize what they see or what they are, therefore protecting them from the dangers of consuming edibles. deeply disturbing product. So you have the Skittles, and you have the candy cane. And right now I think Big Candy is angry. They actually have some of these persons, well, what should I say, at court, looking to sue them for the only way to prevent your child from using drugs is to be open. Talk to them. Warn them. Beware of everything going on in their life. So you're having a dialogue going on. So if anything, any experimentation, you're going to know and be able to respond. That is my advice to persons who want to prevent a child from using some of these things. Some parents use marijuana at school and find it difficult to talk about marijuana with the children. So something that's where we have the problem. But I think that this is where they know how it is, the effects it have on them. So they should at least have a conversation. And it must begin early, as marijuana use starts at an early age. With more potent forms of the drug now available, parents need to recognize that marijuana use is a serious threat and tell their children not to use it. I think that's where I am. Copycat products, as I showed you, Skittles could lead people, particularly children, to mistakenly ingest drugs. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you. Let us give Mrs. Insjack a louder round of applause for her very informative presentation. Essentially, she gave an overview of cannabis use among teens, particularly the edibles. We said before that there's nothing tastier than talking about edibles. When you speak of edibles, almost instantaneously, your taste buds get wild. Put yourself in the place of the youth, adolescent, teenagers. As Mrs. Insjack described, some of these products are very colorfully and enticingly packaged. So we have to be on the lookout so that we avert looming danger. How do we talk with our children about cannabis use? We have begun that conversation tonight. Get educated, pick a good time or a place to talk, express your concerns, listen to your young person so they feel respected, valued, cared for, and supported. Be curious. Keep the conversation door open. Offer options. If they don't want to talk to you, is there a sibling, an aunt, an uncle, a medical professional, a pharmacist that they can speak with? Refer to positive choices. So we have learned a lot, and we need to know more about cannabis edibles and use in teens. So to continue that conversation, we have our second presenter, Dr. Jean Saville Cummings. Dr. Jean Saville Cummings is a Vincentian scientist and life science professional currently working to support government policy development and implementation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. After completing 1 year of A-level courses at the community college, Jean left the state to pursue higher education in the USA. He completed a Bachelor of Science degree in biology at Morgan State University and was subsequently awarded a Doctor of Philosophy in Molecular Medicine from the University of Maryland Medical School. His graduate research focused on the role of a subset of T lymphocytes in combating HIV disease and certain cancers. Jean conducted additional research at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, France, and at the Weatherall Institute of Molecular Medicine at Oxford University in the UK, before eventually returning to the Caribbean. During this time, Jean has authored and contributed to several published scientific articles in the medical fields of immunology, cancer biology, and infectious diseases. Currently serving as chief in the technical department at the Medicinal Cannabis Authority, Jean leads the development of technical industry regulations, infrastructure, and guidelines, and coordinates with other government agencies in the establishment of high-throughput protocols supporting industrial development. Growth is forecast for this role as the scope of the authority is expected to be widened to include other medically relevant controlled substances. Jean also serves as chairperson of the National Standards Council, overseeing the operations of the Bureau of Standards and its drive to establish standardized production models that support economic progress in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed audience, may I present to you Dr. Jean Saville Cummings, our second presenter.
Good night, everyone. I have to thank Tricia for that reading of that profile. It was much shorter when I wrote it, I'm sorry. First, let me thank the Pharmacy Council again for the invitation to come down. We were here, I think, a few months ago, maybe, speaking with the Methodist Church Youth Group about the same topic. And obviously, we're now here with the Pharmacy Council as part of your symposium program, which I congratulate you on. I should say, always complain that we don't do enough for this sort of scientific education in St. Vincent, so it's really nice to have been invited down, so thank you. The topic of cannabis in youth is something which is very pertinent to us at the MCA. I'm here, I should mention, with Ms. Colicia Mingo, who is our pharmacist at the MCA, and nothing I'm going to talk about today will be possible without her involvement, so I should mention that. But the discussion is something which is very important to us because as much as we are talking about medicinal cannabis in St. Vincent, it obviously impacts the discussion on availability and obviously impacts the youth in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who are a particularly vulnerable population. And obviously the discussion in terms of cannabis, youth, edibles, I decided I would take it in three. And eventually we decided not to make the presentation too technical because I know that there are technical people here, but not everybody who's watching is technical. So first I wanted to start with the discussion about what is actually cannabis. It's something we've talked about for a long time, something we grew up with, I think, here in St. Vincent. But overall, it's a genus of psychoactive plants, including 3 species, which are Sativa, Indica, and Ruderalis. These are 3 original species. They've almost been lost in the wild because of hybridization, but if you see the original ones, they're very distinct in the way that they look. It's been used worldwide for medicinal and or recreational purposes. And obviously it goes by many aliases. Ms. Joanne was using the term marijuana, which is a word we don't like to use because it has certain negative legal connotations in the US. But we use the word marijuana, we call it weed, we use the word ganja, we also use the word hemp, and this is something which is important because it's something which is often lost. Hemp is cannabis, right? It's something that I think sometimes we don't really understand, but hemp is cannabis. The word hemp is actually derived in the US for cannabis plants that have less than 0.3% THC. It's still cannabis. And as a result, it still stands by all the federal US laws. It still stands by all the laws here in the Caribbean, including here in St. Vincent. So it's important to understand that this term, when we talk about it, we're talking about cannabis. In terms of the history of it, there's a long, storied history of cannabis around the world, and we use this map here just to sort of illustrate it. So we think that where this X is in Central Asia, we think this is where cannabis was first developed, where it first started growing wild. And in fact, if you go into some of these regions in Kyrgyzstan and the areas around it, you will see fields of cannabis just growing wild by the hectare. And when you see it, you understand why we call it weed, because it grows so easily. But there's history dating back 2700 BC in China, where cannabis was documented as being used for medicine. 3000 BC in a Siberian cave that's dated back to 3000 BC, there's evidence of cannabis use. There was a hemp rope that was discovered in the Czech Republic that was dated to 2900 BC. And we know in the New World, it was the French who introduced it to Nova Scotia first in 1606, and the Spanish who brought it to South America, to Chile, just outside an area called Valparaiso in the 1540s after their conquest. And if you look overall at what we think about human migration around the world, you can kind of get the sense that we've been carrying it with us wherever we've gone as a species. A lot of reason why you would think that might happen. Maybe there's a cultural importance, maybe there's a medical importance, maybe there's an artistic importance. We're not completely sure as to why it became part of our story, but it has definitely become part of our story. It's found basically on every continent around the world, and there's a long history of it being used for, as I mentioned, medical or recreational use over the years. Because I know so many of you are technical here, I can mention the endocannabinoid system, right, which is our internal system, internal to us, that recognizes these phytocannabinoids that we find in the plants. Now, the endocannabinoid system, I've heard discussion as to whether it evolved with humans because of cannabis use. How is it that we could have a system that recognizes a plant that has molecules that's just growing at random, right? But the fact is the endocannabinoid system is found in animals, and so it predates, I think, human use. So overall, we could take from it that the plant itself and the substances within it are very important to human biology. They obviously interact with human biology very well, and that's why it's so important that we have these discussions, because today we are using it for medicine, people are using it for recreational purposes as well, because it interacts with us so well, and it has been doing for a long time. As you will know, at least the guys here in the room, it was a mid-century rise in abuse of cannabis with other compounds that led to the creation of 3 global conventions to govern access to what were termed as dangerous drugs. There was a single convention on narcotic drugs in 1961. It was amended in 1972. There was a convention on psychotropic substances in 1971, and there was a UN convention later on that dealt with trafficking in 1988. As a result of being party to these treaties, St. Vincent and every other country in the world had to develop local laws to sort of mirror what the treaties were saying. And it's because of that we have some of these laws that you guys are familiar with. So I think everybody here is familiar with the Pharmacy Act. There's a Medical Registration Act, there's a Drugs Prevention and Misuse Act, and all of these, again, initially were designed to allow St. Vincent to legally have legislation in place, locally, that mirrors what the drug treaties require. Subsequent to that, in 2018, St. Vincent passed the Medicinal Cannabis Industry Act, which allowed for the creation of medicinal cannabis industry here in St. Vincent. And since then, we've passed patient access regulations pursuant to the Act and standards and compliance regulations also pursuant. One of the things the Act did was to create the Medicinal Cannabis Authority, which is where we work. The convention says that the use of any of these compounds must be for medical and scientific use, and it must be under license. So for there to be a license, there must be a licensing authority. In St. Vincent, it's the Medicinal Cannabis Authority. In other countries, they call it different things, but this is what it is here. We are established by the Act, as mentioned. We have a board which governs, which gives oversight to us, and we are located at Rivulet. You are always welcome to come and visit. We love having guests. I know some of you have been up there already, but you're always welcome to come and visit if the interest takes you. Overall, when you look at the licensing structure in terms of how is cannabis regulated here, there are several licenses that you can apply for. So there's a traditional cultivator license, which is completely unique to St. Vincent. This license is granted to individuals who have traditionally been planting cannabis illegally. And it's essentially to allow them the opportunity to come into the legal framework. And again, we're the only place in the world that has that. There are cultivation licenses, which are given to farmers or to companies that are cultivating, which is from seed all the way up to a mature plant. And then there are manufacturing licenses, which are given to companies that are taking the mature flowers and doing extraction, building all sorts of products out of it. There are dispensing licenses, which are very similar to pharmacy license here. In fact, dispensing licenses for cannabis are only given to pharmacies in St. Vincent. In addition to this, there are research licenses and there are transport licenses, but these are the ones that we really talk about. And when you speak about dispensing licenses, it's something we always try to pay a little bit of attention to, because the concept is something that is maybe not completely obvious. So I mentioned the licenses have to go to pharmacies. In St. Vincent, we are a medicinal jurisdiction. Other countries are doing things differently, some of them not well, but we are doing it completely in compliance with the conventions. And conventions mean medicine or science. Medicines have to come out to pharmacies, which is why the dispensing licenses here are given to pharmacies. But in addition to having traditional pharmacies, like where some of you work or have worked, these pharmacies can apply and have applied for licenses to be able to carry cannabis products. There are also other versions of it. And so there's a concept we created of a license called the Consumption Lounge. And the first one opened, I think, in April 2022, sorry. And when it opened, there was a lot of feedback in the public, because I think people didn't really understand why we were creating a space where a person can take cannabis and go and consume legally, right? In other countries, they may call them smoke shops or different things. Here, they're referred to as consumption lounges, which is what they are. The idea behind the consumption lounge is that you have a safe space to consume cannabis. And you will ask, well, why do you need it? The first answer to that is that smoking cannabis in public in St. Vincent is still illegal. If even you have medicinal cannabis, if even you have a doctor's prescription, it is still illegal to smoke in St. Vincent in public. The police generally don't bother people, I think, but it is still illegal. Now, for locals, you may think, well, this is not much of a consideration. I just do whatever I want. But if you think about tourists who are here on the island, who are some of them here just for a day because they've arrived on a cruise ship, they may want to get medicinal cannabis, but they can't smoke in public. And so we had to create a space where it could be consumed legally, which is what the consumption lounges are. And I'll show you actually a little bit later where the consumption lounges are located. As a result of the license activity so far, we have currently a full value chain of products that are available in pharmacies here at St. Vincent. There are products that are dried flowers and related products, so you can buy flowers basically in a bag. Or you could get pre-rolls, which are like cigarettes with cannabis in them. And then there are manufactured products which are also available, so topical lotions and creams. There are sublingual tinctures. There are vape cartridges and pens. And then there are capsules that are also available. And here are just a few photos of some of these. So from two of the companies, I guess. These are flowers. This is a pre-roll. This is a vape. This is a tincture, and so on. So these products are available here. They are available legally in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, right? When you talk about the industry and the impact of the legal industry, we sort of class it into four categories. So there's the economic impact, which, here I just have some words, I'll read them. So there's the activity in the sector which directly impacts on job creation. And generally, when our operations people go out, they can give you the numbers in terms of how many jobs have been created and so forth. I don't know what those numbers are. But there's impacts on job creation, upstream diversification, and also revenue collection by the government. In terms of medical, we have seen clear enhanced patient outcomes from people using cannabis, as opposed to some of the products that they had been using before. Some of them are very, very positive outcomes. People coming out to the authority and being very vocal about how happy they are to finally find something that works for them. There's the social impact, which is super important. Today is a very good example of it, which is it's removed a little bit the taboo of cannabis, which allows us to have these sort of discussions. We were here a couple of months ago speaking with some teenagers, effectively, that we could not have done before this industry started, right? Because now we're in a position where we have the information, we can give it to you without giving the impression that we are promoting something illegal. And so it allows us to have these conversations to bring information out so that people can have this sort of knowledge that Shusha was referring to without the taboo that was established before. And there are also positive impacts on drug policy. There's a term that we call alternative development, where some of these individuals who have been illegally planting, as I mentioned, we've created this license class that allows them to come in. These guys have come in by the hundreds. They've come in, they've gotten licenses, Some of them, because they've come in, they've finally been able to get a bank account. They've finally been able to come out to the mountains, start planting there where they live near their villages. And some of them have come down and decided, listen, I don't want to plant cannabis anymore. I want to get into fishing, or I want to plant tomatoes, or whatever it is. And the engagement with them has really allowed us to shift the illegal policy, the illegal production away from what it was before. So a real positive impact also on drug policy is something we've been seeing. When we talk then about patient access to cannabis in St. Vincent, we had obviously to create a whole framework that allowed it. The Act by itself did a very good job of outlining what had to happen. But eventually we had to build the regulations around it. And so the local patient access framework is something I'll go through just so that everybody understands how you can get cannabis legally and safely in St. Vincent, right? The framework essentially focuses on 3 pillars. There's the MCA, there's the authorized physician, and there's the authorized pharmacy, right? This is essentially a little mock-up of what it looks like, and so just bear with me for a second. So if you look at these 3 pillars, being the physician, the pharmacy, and the MCA, it obviously starts with the patient showing up at this doctor and saying, doctor, I'm not feeling well. Maybe I have some sleep disorder, maybe I have some anxiety, maybe I have some chronic pain, whatever. The doctor assesses the patient, as they do for everything else, and says, okay, I think cannabis is something that we can use to treat you with. So the doctor creates 3 sets of documentation. Effectively, one of them is a medical certificate, which is essentially just a doctor's note to the patient information, but it's something that's official that has to come back to us. There is also the prescription, which everybody is accustomed to, and there's also a temporary ID card. I have a temporary ID card here. We have them over there if you want to look at them afterwards, and I'll tell you in a second why they're important. So armed with these 3 documents, the patient can then leave the authorized physician and present to the authorized pharmacy. This is again a pharmacy that is carrying products because it's been authorized by the MCA to carry products. The pharmacists have been trained and so on. So he shows up, he presents the documentation, he or she, shows up, presents the documentation to the pharmacy. The pharmacy is now confident that this patient has gone through the system up until now absolutely correctly. Pharmacy dispenses the product, eventually the patient starts feeling better. I think it's within a month, roughly, we get the paperwork and the reports back from the other 2 partners, being the doctor and the pharmacy. They report to us, well, this is the number of patients we've seen, this is the number of cannabis we've prescribed, this is we get the patient information to understand what is being treated and what is not being treated. And the data that comes from it is something which is actually quite interesting from our perspective, because I think when we started talking about cannabis here a few years ago, the assumption was that cannabis was a young man's problem. When you look on the street, on the block, it's always young guys who are smoking, and you think, okay, cannabis is a young man's problem. What we are seeing quite clearly now, after almost 2 years of data, is that the majority of patients that we are seeing are between the ages of 30 and 50. So they're not young people. They're people who are working professionals who are dealing with different lifestyle issues, whether it's anxieties, whether it's sleep, whether it's chronic pain, what have you. These are the majority of patients that we're seeing, people in 30 to 50. We're also finding that there are as many women getting cannabis prescriptions as there are men. And so it's really changed, I think, a little bit the expectation of what this industry was going to support. But the numbers are strong, and we've been seeing them. Every time we get any numbers, it just validates that point. So eventually reporting comes back, so we have all that information. The last thing the patient has to do then is to get a permanent ID, which is this one, from the MCA. So the temporary IDs are only valid for 30 days. The permanents are valid for 1 year, right? And again, there's a process where you can get them done. In fact, you don't have to come out to the MCA to get them. You can actually get them through the pharmacies. So at the end of it, the patient has the product, is feeling better. The patient has an ID card that allows him, primarily the purpose of these is that it allows him to walk around with cannabis. So in St. Vincent, we raised the lower limit of cannabis that qualifies for criminal offense to 56 grams. Normally, when we do these things, we bring 56 grams worth of cannabis so that you can see what they look like. But it's basically like 2 hands full. It's a lot of cannabis. So anything more than this is a criminal offense. unless you have one of these, right? Now you can say to anybody, any police officer who stops you, listen, this is my medicinal cannabis, it was prescribed, here's my ID. So that's why the IDs are particularly important. On our website, which is here, we have a list of the authorized physicians currently, although this list I think needs updating. There's also a list of pharmacies. We have a list of pharmacists as well? Pharmacists? Just pharmacies, yeah. We have the list of pharmacies as well on the website. And just to give you a little bit of an overview, this is what the current provider map looks like. So we have, and I apologize, I know it's a little bit hard to see from that distance, but we have the majority obviously concentrated within the commercial centers in St. Vincent, which is in the south. This is where most of the doctors are, most of the pharmacies are. There are currently 4 consumption lounges. One is in Rathamill, one is in Enham, one is in Georgetown, and one is in Beckway. We have, I think, 2 other applications for additional ones that are coming through, that should be coming through at some point soon. But all this information, again, is available on our website if it is of interest to you. Here in St. Vincent, again, because we are medical, we have a list of medical conditions that doctors are authorized to treat with cannabis, right? And so any of these qualify, whether it's cancer, well, there are 20 of them here. A couple of them are umbrella terms like epileptic disorders and sleep disorders or, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Actually, I don't know how I did that. Okay. So these 20 conditions that physicians can treat with cannabis, and there's also the provision within the law that would allow us to expand that if other conditions become medically relevant. And again, when we're looking now at which ones are being treated, again, it's something interesting. We're seeing a lot of sleep disorders, we're seeing a lot of anxiety, we're seeing a lot of pain. We have numbers in terms of RA, rheumatoid arthritis, We have, other immune disorders as well. There's spinal, there are quite a few things that are being treated currently, which again is driving a lot of interest forward. You mentioned research. And what we've had over the last few years is interest from research groups who are curious to understand cannabis here. The reason being there are conditions that are prevalent here in St. Vincent that are not prevalent in other parts of the world where they're doing cannabis research. Sickle cell anemia is one of them. And so because we have a population of sickle cell here, because we have the ability to do cannabis research, St. Vincent becomes an obvious place where that sort of research can be done. And so we've had groups in to talk about it. 2 of them were very serious, and then COVID happened, and so they had to stop. But this is a list as they currently stand, and as I mentioned, it can be expanded as needed. So this is all of cannabis, legal cannabis in St. Vincent, right? It can be gotten legally, safely. You can get product that you know is free of pesticide. I think one of your comments there, somebody was talking about the difference between products from dispensaries versus products that are made at home. And there is real value in getting product that has, a quality stamp on it. But the product is available here in St. Vincent legally in a condition that you can trust. There are challenges with growing cannabis in a completely clean setting. And so you should not assume that the stuff that you can get in certain places is of the same quality as others. Moving on then to the concept of cannabis in youth, there are obvious issues that we are dealing with in St. Vincent, we have been dealing with. Since I was a schoolboy here, cannabis was an issue. My child is now in school here, cannabis is still an issue. Although now I think it's probably, as mentioned, it's becoming easier to hide. And so when we ask basically what are the reasons for cannabis use in youth, it's a slight breaking down of the subset of questions as to why youth choose drugs in the first place. But when we talk about cannabis, there are really 4 things that we like to highlight. So there's this consideration that cannabis is less harmful than alcohol and other substances, right? There is this consideration, and generally it's probably true. But this is one of the reasons why youth will choose cannabis. There's this desire out of curiosity or wanting to experiment, and while that is not unique to cannabis, it's sort of broadly fitting to most drugs. There's the idea of fitting in, everybody else is doing it, So why shouldn't I? You know, we do the same thing with beers. I think when I was in school, I remember being challenged, Treasure, about beers, you know, which I completely put aside, but it happens. And then, of course, there's the perceived positive effects, such as coping with stress, coping with anxiety. Kids hear that medicinal cannabis is good for you, and so part of that initial aversion to it is taken away, which is why it's so important for us to have this conversation, why it's so important for you guys to have the information that you need to effectively be able to communicate with these people, with young people. But we think overall that these are some of the big reasons why in St. Vincent kids will choose cannabis. And so it's really understanding why, what are the reasons behind these inclinations that we can actually target cannabis use and use. So there's curiosity. Well, what are you curious about? Can I channel that curiosity into something else? There's the idea of fitting in with friends. Well, that's obviously a case of which friends are you trying to fit in with, right? So by trying to understand these things, we can get a real sense of how we can direct use in one direction or the other. And obviously, we're here tonight to talk about infused edibles, which are becoming more and more, just like you said, more and more prevalent, even here in St. Vincent. I know there have been a couple of serious cases here, but there are cases which are not serious that are just super, super prevalent. There's increasing ability to understand how to make these things at home, first of all, thanks to the internet. And so more people are willing to do it, more people are able to do it, and so more people do it. But because it's a growing problem, it's obviously something that we have to really focus on, I think, especially with young people. So this, I think, is a million-dollar question, which is why are edible cannabis products dangerous? That's the reason, I think, why we're here. And really we have sort of three things we like to focus on. One, there's a lack of regulation of contents and contaminants. So the difference between getting stuff from a regulated source, like a pharmacy, and getting stuff from an unregulated source. Generally in St. Vincent, with regards to edibles, they are only unregulated sources. While in St. Vincent, we do have within the Act the ability to have edibles as a medicinal product. We have not launched it as a product line. And so you can only get cannabis edibles from an unregulated source. And really the two major ones. One, there's the one that people make at home, right? And there are all sorts of questions there with regards to quality, with regards to concentration, with regards to possible contaminants, with regard to the source material of cannabis which is being used. It's not even just putting it together at home. It's where's the cannabis coming from in the first place. That's one unregulated source. The other one is from overseas. And so like the picture I had up before, even some pictures that you have, these are products that may be coming from North America. Within the US, each state sort of has the right to set their own rules, right? They're the United States, so they can do whatever they want. But the regulations are not all the same. And so you can go to one state, and they may be regulating cannabis one way. You go to another state, and it's completely unregulated. And because of that, it creates a lot of ambiguity with the products that present challenges, that present dangers, I think, with products. So this really the first reason we like to highlight, which is the lack of regulation. The second is this food-based formulation and packaging, which can encourage excessive consumption, which is particularly dangerous with kids. When you have products that look like candies, forget, like even as adults, if you give me a bag of Skittles, I may want to eat half of them, just because it looks like food, right? And it's even worse with children, obviously. Now, there are, as you mentioned, some pushback. There's some pushback to try to stop this process where edibles are being presented as candies. Here in St. Vincent, for example, in our regulations, it is illegal to produce cannabis edibles in stuff that will appeal to children. So this, what you're seeing for like Skittles or whatever, you could not produce these incidents. It would be illegal, right? It would be against the regulations. But it is something which is obviously very concerning, and it's definitely, again, you look at it and you think, well, how can I change the formulation to make this problem less of a problem? And it can be done with packaging, it can be done with the type of formulation, it can be done with the size of the formulation. So again, within our regulations, if you're making edibles in St. Vincent, you have to package them per serving size. And so if it's one cookie, the cookie must have one serving size worth of cannabis in it. As opposed to, again, from unregulated sources where you get a cookie and it's really 5 servings in it. but it's in one package. And it makes it very, very easy to have the entire thing, having 5 times as much as you want, as much as you should. And the third reason we like to highlight is one I think Joe started to mention, which is the slow rate of delivery to the bloodstream. Again, because it's going through the stomach and the liver, it takes a while in comparison. I think I have a slide here, yes. It takes a while as compared to some of the other methods. So here I'm comparing it with smoking, where the time to effect is very fast. And because it's fast, because you can feel yourself getting high, people naturally will ease off. So if somebody's using it, whether it's a pen or if even it's a dropper and you're putting it under your tongue, again, this is very fast acting, you can feel it acting on you. And so you know, okay, I've had enough, and you take a break. With the edibles, because it goes into your stomach and it takes 45 minutes to an hour to get processed, to get into your bloodstream, it is very easy to overdose. Because you take some, 20 minutes later, oh, I'm not feeling anything, let me take some more. And then before you know it, it kicks in, and you've gone over the limit. This happens, it happens quite frequently. It's very, very easy to do, especially when the products are not packaged per serving. And this is assuming even that the serving size is appropriate to the formulation that you have. And so this is really a crucial one, this ability to overdose very quickly. Overdosing in cannabis is not thought to be life-threatening. There are drugs that if you overdose, it will kill you, heroin being the most famous one, killing tens of thousands of people in the US every year. Cannabis will not kill you that way because the way the receptors are aligned throughout the spinal system, it doesn't interfere with breathing like heroin does, right? It doesn't go into the medulla. So they're non-life-threatening consequences, we think, with cannabis. But there are situational problems. So for example, if you are taking a product and you get super, super high and you pass out and you're in the wrong place, that could be a problem. And so when you're talking overall about the primary dangers of THC, and again, we're talking about THC here as the primary cannabinoid that is creating the issue in cannabis. We like to break them down into 2 risk groups. So, and these are just what I'm terming here the primary dangers. So there are the acute risks to high exposure to THC, which is an impaired driving ability, obviously, which is something, sadly people end up in bad situations, but also this lack of situational awareness and drowsiness. We talk all the time about, if you have, let's say young ladies in particular, and you overdose on something and it makes you pass out and you're not in a safe environment, it can lead to some very, very bad outcomes. There are also chronic risks that we like to highlight. There's this risk of psychosis in certain individuals. I started off by saying that cannabis is something that we have been carrying around for thousands of years because it impacts us. Now, the endocannabinoid system is something that was only discovered maybe 20 years ago, and so we're only just really starting to understand some of what it does. It's clear that the system itself is hugely impactful in neurological development. It's very, very clear. And the reason we say that is because when you look at the cases of individuals who are using high THC products in particular at a young age while the brain is still in development, there's very, very clear evidence for neurological damage. I don't know how often you guys kept to go up to the mental health rehabilitation center. But I can tell you for a fact that they have a very strong number in terms of the number of people who end up there from taking cannabis at too young an age. It's something which I think it's familial. There are genetic backgrounds that are more important than others, that are more susceptible than others. But I don't think we know enough about them to be able to say that this type of person is at risk or this person is not at risk. The closest thing we have is to be able to say, well, if you have a history of psychosis in your family, then it's something you need to be concerned about in terms of high THC exposure while your brain is still developing. The other one is impaired cognitive abilities that potentially impact on school and work. Again, neurological damage potentially caused by exposure to THC at too high a level for too long a period. I say all the time, all of us who grew up here in St. Vincent, all of us had one friend, every adult in this room has one friend who in school used to smoke plenty marijuana, and the guy never recovered. Everybody knows somebody like that, right? And it would be a shame for us to sit here and pretend that it's not true. It's absolutely true. The good thing is that it's something that we can manage because, again, we can provide the education. We can provide access to safe products. We can provide medical guidance through the physicians and the pharmacies, but the risk generally is there. And it's super important that everybody understands it, because as the MCA, we don't really have the reach to be able to talk to everybody all the time. We can come into groups like this, we can go to schools, we can do everything we can. But the more information that you have as people who interact with youth, the more likely it is that that information is going to get to the youth. And when we talk about this, we like to talk about the concept of a youth ally. And I think Joe was, or maybe Tricia was talking about how can we impact on it? How can we positively impact on it? And this concept of a youth ally, and we think youth allies are people who use a combination of attitudes, skills, awareness to create safe spaces that support and nurture open discussions. Right? You touched on this a little bit. Safe spaces. I have a teenage son. You know, he's probably watching this on TV right now, shaking his head. But kids are not easy to talk to when they get to a certain age, right? They get very accustomed to speaking to their peers, especially now, I think, with the access to the phones. It's becoming more and more difficult to talk to kids about certain topics. I find that the more you talk about it, the easier it is to do. But it's definitely something that we have to consider in terms of, can we be youth allies? And when we think about the attributes of a youth ally, we think somebody who's approachable, somebody who's trustworthy, non-judgmental, somebody who's empathetic, somebody who's respectful, somebody who's a good listener. I think we can all be that. We can all be that. Right? The fact that we're here on a Saturday night trying to learn is an indication that we have interest in learning, we have interest in bettering ourselves, we have interest in bettering our society. And I think we can all be that youth ally to help the kids around us. Some of us have bigger spheres of influence with youth than others, but we all have access to one child or two child that we can give that right information to when we have the chance. Looking forward then, having gone through everything, we think that the expanding availability of edible cannabis here in St. Vincent should encourage some behavioral changes, right? I think they need to encourage some behavioral change. For start, we need to employ extra vigilance and awareness when we're purchasing snack products and read packaging labels carefully. It's very, very easy now. I mean, everybody, all of us have family in the US, or in Canada, I suppose, who send barrels down every year. All of us do, right? And in some states, cannabis is so legal that you can walk into a Target and pick it up on the counter right next to the regular Skittles. Right? That is very, very easy to do now. It comes down, it gets to your home, you say, oh, that's Skittles, you put it in the corner, and then your 10-year-old child goes and finds it, and you have a problem. We need to read these package labels very, very carefully, because they mimic so very well the food products that we're accustomed to consuming. Again, we need to, when we are ourselves buying them, especially from online retailers, to be sure that we're asking questions about the ingredients. Yes, I'm buying something that looks like Skittles. Are these actually Skittles? Right? We need to seek credible information about cannabis, like you are doing now. We do have a website. We have some social media. We provide a lot of information. We have all the information that's developed already, whether it's flyers or what have you. We are always available to come and give talks, to provide information to groups. And so maybe you guys leave here today and maybe some person has a group that they want us to come and talk to. Absolutely happy to come and do that. The information needs to get out, right? And by being good youth allies, we need to ensure that our understanding of the information is completely up to date with reality. And here I said we have to keep up to date on what products are available in St. Vincent, which is something that you can ask from your pharmacist or your doctor. And then finally, understanding that while cannabis has many benefits, its use is not intended for children or youth, again, because of their still developing brain. We are still trying to understand the role of the endocannabinoid system in neurological development. Maybe when we do, in some years, we'll be able to precisely say, well, okay, at 18, yes, but at 17, no. But we are just not there yet. And so we have to be mindful of it. If we are using it for medicinal purposes, and cannabis famously is used in some childhood diseases, principally epileptic disorders. One of the most famous cases of medical use of cannabis involved an epilepsy and a strain of cannabis called Charlotte's Web, because it was used to treat a girl named Charlotte who had epilepsy. So kids can use it under medical guidance, but it's under medical guidance, right? The doctors have to do an assessment, what is the best thing for the child, and if it's cannabis, use cannabis, but use it responsibly. So the key takeaways, I think, for our youth leaving here today, and I think it's my last slide, we want to delay and minimize cannabis use for as long as possible. As long as possible. If you have a medical reason to use it while you're a teenager, use it under guidance. Otherwise, please delay and minimize for as long as possible. When you get to be an adult, you can make adult decisions and go from there. We've seen it starting at an early age, and using it often is associated with this increased risk for cannabis-induced psychosis in certain individuals that have this family history. Again, something we have to be mindful of. And when we're speaking about this here, we're talking specifically about about cannabis products that have a high concentration of THC, which is very relevant for edibles because of the way they are made. If you are getting brownies, generally, you may get a flour that has been ground, made into a cooking batter. I'm not telling you how to make it, made into a cooking batter, and then you make a brownie. The process of heating activates the THC into its active form, which is why people get high when they eat the brownie, right? But at this, you are eating a concentration of THC that is equivalent to the flour that you use to make it. And flours generally, we do have exceptions. There are companies here that have very strong flour, but generally flours don't get above 20%, right? 20% THC. With other edibles, if you're doing extractions, so you're taking the flour and now they're extracting down the oils from it and using that to make an edible, whether it's a Skittles or whatever it is. Even here, people are doing it, right? If it's the oils that they're using, these oils can contain 50-60% THC. It's much, much more potent, right? And it's something we really, really have to be mindful of. Again, family history is important in that sense. We're always encouraging avoiding combining cannabis with alcohol and other substances. Again, that's an obvious one. We encourage that people don't drive after using cannabis. Don't drive after using cannabis. Make alternative plans to get home, or perhaps sleep at some friend's house. And then finally, we want to make sure that people understand the importance of ensuring that they are in a safe environment before they consume cannabis, especially the edibles. Make sure that you're in a safe environment. Consider where the risks are, where the hazards are, and make your plans accordingly. Nobody wants to end up in a situation where something happens because somebody was incapacitated and they were in an unsafe environment. So for sure, as we are talking to youth, today, especially in St. Vincent, this is one that we always try to highlight. But overall, this is the end of the presentation. Again, I want to thank the council for giving us the opportunity to come and chat. There's a lot of information that we've just touched on today. There's a lot of information that's available, which we can dispense, as needed to different groups. If there's more information that you feel that you need here tonight, feel free to come and bother myself or Ms. Mingo. She knows all the answers. Sometimes I have to ask her. Make sure to bother us before you leave here tonight. We have here some of the documentation that are used in the patient access process. So we have prescriptions, we have some of the cards, we have the medical certificates and so forth. I should mention that we do have these documents in soft copy. Other companies, different pharmacies are using different versions of the soft copy, and so you may not always see the paper version. There's an online version that works just as well. But feel free to come up, ask questions if you need. If you feel like you have interest in more information, just let us know. If there's another opportunity for us to come and present, we'll be happy to do that. But I think you're going into questions afterwards, so I can go into that. So then let me thank you for your attention this evening, and look forward to any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jean. Well done. We're still on the journey. When I look into your faces, I can see that you're spellbound and ready to ask lots of interesting questions. I took copious notes, and John summarized it quite well, and I'm sure we can remember why we think that there is a real danger for teens in consuming edibles, and also how we can mitigate or or we can promote delayed use of cannabis products. So, without further ado, you're here to take your questions. John is here to take your questions. Miss Mingo is here to take your questions. Anyone has any burning issue they want clarified? Any questions? Any curiosity? So I'll go first. You spoke about the problem of unregulated products, meaning that users need to think of the source where the edible is coming from. So in terms of the content, do you think someone can create a balance in the product, like 50% THC and 50% CBD, and what would be the likely effect of that?
So that's a good question. When you do extractions from flowers, you are essentially extracting the oils off the surface of the flower, right? Once the oil comes off, you get the oil neat. So whatever it is in the flower, that's what you get when you pull it off. And so if you have a flower that has 20% THC, then your oil comes out with more THC in it as compared to CBD. If you have one which is a balance, you can have flowers with their balance of THC and CBD. And so if you extract this, again, you will end up with a balanced product. Overall, the extraction process, unless there's a neat extraction that you can follow with distillation. And so you're all scientists here, so you understand what I mean. The initial product has everything that has come out of it. So all the cannabinoids, the terpenes, some of the flavonoids will come down in the extraction. But you can then do distillation to end up with a CBD isolate or THC isolate, and you can use that then to build other products. Obviously, that's not something it's challenging to do in your home kitchen, and so you tend to need a little bit more technology to do that, but it can be done. And so the products, we showed you one product that one of the companies here is making with a vape product, and they have also a dropper that they're using. From this company, you can get THC droppers, you can get CBD droppers, you can get 50-50 droppers. It can be done. And for some things, you want one or the other. So for some conditions, you would treat with THC. Some conditions, you would treat with CBD. But overall, there's a synergistic effect to the compounds. And so if you would expect, let's say, that a THC response is here and a CBD response is here, if you put them together, the response is not double. It's 10, 15 times, right? So there's a synergistic effect. So there's often a benefit to having a little bit of both compounds in the product. So it can be done. It's challenging, but it can be done.
Thank you very much. Anyone else with a question? Okay, go right ahead. Jean is here to field your question. Thank you.
I think Mr. Walker's come with the mic.
Hi, good evening. You've mentioned that you have not been able, or science has not been able to narrow down specifically what age youths can partake in such activities without under supervision. Seeing that we have young ones in the audience, what would be an age range, not specific, an age range that you may say it's wise enough for them to partake in any cannabinoid product?
So that's a good question. In St. Vincent, we have a legal age, which is 18. And so if the child is under 18, they're technically a minor. And so to even get one of these cards from a doctor, they have to show up at the doctor with what we call a caregiver. And so that caregiver could be a parent, it could be a guardian, or what have you, right? And so if the child is under 18 in St. Vincent, they are legally required to present with a caregiver in order to get access to cannabis, right? So that's from a legal perspective. From a technical perspective, it's much harder to say. We're all adults here, or most of us. Some of us may have kids. We know that they grow at different rates. Some of them are mature much faster than others. Generally, we think by the time you get to be about 18, most people, the neurology is fully developed, although there's some evidence that it may go into the early 20s. I would say I would definitely not feel comfortable giving anybody under 18 cannabis for myself, right? Again, if you have a physician, it's up to the physician to decide if you have a child who's younger than this, whether he thinks that the benefit of using cannabis outweighs the risk, if there is risk. Because maybe this person is from a family where there's no history of psychosis at all, and so that risk is minimized. But if they're from a family where there's a strong history of psychosis, it's something, it adds to the math. So hope I answer your question. There's sort of two ways. There's a legal distinction and there's this potential technical one as well. We always get one question, Trisha. People always asking if we have samples, and the answer is always no. Okay, don't ask.
So while the audience are formulating their questions, I'll go ahead to ask another question. I know they have lots of questions. They're just putting it together in their minds so they can properly articulate it and you can give them the proper answer. I know that is happening. So, you just said that if there's no familial risk involved, then probably the physician can see if the benefits outweigh the risk. And if there's no risk in terms of psychosis or any mental disorders or mental challenges occurring in the family, then they might feel it's safe to use it. So I'm wondering if the person is under 25, because we know that the brain is still developing up to age 25 or so, scientists or researchers say, wouldn't that by itself create an obvious risk? If the person is within that age range, not over 25, although psychosis is not found in the family, or there are no other obvious risk factors?
There's always that risk, right? You would try to evaluate the risk based on the information that's available to you. But it's important that we understand that when we're talking about this risk, we are talking about high levels of THC exposure for prolonged use in individuals with a certain background, right? A lot of the reasons where you want to treat minors with cannabis is for CBD. Like we talk about epileptic disorders, for example, which is a very important one for medical use. We don't use THC for this, we use CBD. And so it's something, even, again, it depends on what you're trying to treat. And so the physician would have to make an evaluation. What is the best product for the patient? Is this product safe to give to the patient, given what I understand about the patient's family? There's always a risk, but I mean, there's a risk with aspirin as well. So it's really something that the doctors essentially have to evaluate. It's why it's so important, I think, that we have a medical system, because then at least the doctors who are trained physicians are in a position to do this evaluation. It's also why we do physicians training. When we're doing authorization of physicians, we go through a training course so that they understand how to evaluate these risks and what they have to look out for to make these decisions. So there's always a risk, but when we're speaking about psychosis, we're talking about a very small percentage of people, and we're talking about those people using high percentage THC over a prolonged period. That's what we're really talking about in terms of risk.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Okay, Dr. John, I have another question. We spoke about the slow rate of delivery in terms of the edibles compared to the products which are inhaled or smoked or vaped. So the user might not be checking the effects or might be overdosing essentially. So what might be your most salient points of caution to parents in terms of checking and making sure that their teens are not using these edibles? We know that we're living in the WW age, and the internet is replete with recipes, mocktails in 5 steps, can of butter, 1 to 3, your edibles, your brownies, read on. And you know, our kids are quite curious. So what would be your most salient suggestions for parents in terms of making sure that their teens are safe and have that discussion, create this open discussion for the teen?
So, first of all, I would say that you seem to be very knowledgeable in your production of edibles, Tricia.
Thank you. I'm learning.
I'm sure it was just for research purposes. I'm sure of it. No, I think it goes back to the slide where I was talking about reasons why youth choose cannabis, right? And I think this is what I would focus on. And so as I mentioned, I have a son. And so if one of the reasons people might use it is because of the crowd that they're in. So if they're in a crowd where everybody's smoking, they may want to smoke as well, right? And so as a parent, you have to look, well, I mean, we say it all the time, not just about cannabis, but mind the company that you keep, right? And so you're paying attention to who they're with, you're paying attention to what they're doing, where they're going, and so forth. Again, the other one is about curiosity. And again, this is not specific to cannabis, but teenagers get curious, they want to try different things. It's trying to understand how I can channel that curiosity into other things. Maybe it's sport, maybe it's an art, maybe it's something different. But it's really communication. I think the young people need to understand how to recognize the risks in their social environment and what to do when these challenges, when they come up. So, you know, maybe it's walking away, maybe it's doing something else, maybe it's picking up the phone and calling their parent. You know, they have to have an understanding of what they can do when they're faced with the situation. We know one of the other things we do with Ministry of Health, as you know, is we work on drug policy. And we like to think about drugs sort of in, I should say I do, like to think about drugs in sort of two reasons, right? 2 steps. Like there's a reason why people try drugs in the first place, and then there's a reason why people go back to drugs. And it's not the same reason, right? So I think generally curiosity, that experimentation, everybody gets that, right? And so there's always that inkling to maybe try something the first time, but going back to it is usually something else. And it's trying to understand what these motivations are and trying to channel your wards in the right direction to get away from this. It's not easy. I think it's easier to do if you are a parent who likes to communicate or you're a guardian who likes to communicate. But again, when you talk about youth allies, we're talking about not just parents and guardians, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about pastors, we're talking about coaches, we're talking about people in the community. It's really just speaking with the children, with the youth, helping them understand what the options are. And I think importantly, helping them to understand that they don't need drugs to be cool. And they don't need drugs to be a complete adult. And they don't need drugs to fit in, right? There are other forms of doing that.
Well said, John. Thank you very much for those answers. Anyone else has a question? Okay.
Okay. One of the thoughts stemmed from when we mentioned risk. Some of the young persons understand the risk, but there is this perception that based on the food intake, the type of food, the impact is not the same. So there are persons who would say, if you eat properly, then it wouldn't affect you as much. Is there any correlation based on research or your experience in terms of that? Because that is a myth that I don't know if it's a myth, but that's something that is often heard around.
It's a good question. So generally, medications in general are reactive to the person who's consuming them, right? Cannabis is no different. The interesting thing, I think, maybe with cannabinoids is that they are fat soluble, right? They're not water soluble. And so anecdotally, here in St. Vincent, we always hear people talk about boiling cannabis roots, right? And drinking the tea. But you'd always hear that if you boil the root in milk, you'll sleep for 2 days, right? Because the milk is fat soluble and it pulls the cannabinoids out of the root better than water does, right? I'm not encouraging that, I'm just saying. but the point is the diet obviously has an impact on the solubility of the cannabinoids, the amount of fat in your skin, in your body, because this is where it's stored essentially. That's why I think Joe had a slide which was talking about the length of time that the cannabinoids will stay in your system. It's super important with athletes, like I was an athlete, it's super important with athletes because it lengthens the time that they can find it in your blood, right? And so, because it stays in your fat cells, right? Now, for people who have a certain diet and they may have more fat, this may change the way the body metabolizes it. To people who have less fat, maybe it makes sense. I don't know what the numbers are specifically, but it definitely makes sense. Stop turning it off.
Okay, my question is about addiction and quitting. Because quite often you might hear you'd say, okay, I'm just going to try one joint or I'm just going to try it now. And then over time, they consume a lot more than trying it now. And they're of the opinion that because it's a herb, as they will say, it's from the soil, I can quit at any point or I can quit at any time. How hard is it to quit cold turkey?
I should start by saying that this is probably not my field of expertise, but one, the concept that it is an herb, therefore it is safe, is fallacious. Heroin is from poppy, which is a herb, right? And heroin will kill you. So that is something I don't subscribe to. Generally, I know it's something we say a lot culturally, and again, because we have this long history of taking it all over the planet with our history, people believe it. I will say that as far as drugs go, cannabis is very safe, right? That much is clear. And so when people are using it, I met somebody maybe 2 or 3 years ago who would smoke one type of weed in the morning and one type of weed in the evening, right? Because he needed something to lift him up and something to help him sleep at night, right? So, yeah. And when we go onto farms, especially traditional cultivator farms, it's not uncommon to see people working and they have something in their mouth and it will be in their mouth all day, right? The people who are use it all the time. With quitting, I think it's like anything else. It's the reality with drugs is that addiction is a disease, and it's not necessarily something that you can just turn on or turn off. That's why I said it's 2 steps. There's the initial trial, and there's a reason why people go back to it. And I think there's been lots of research in understanding how you deal with addiction in terms of how you treat it as a disease. From us in the Caribbean, I think. From us in the Caribbean, because we are within the Western Hemisphere where drugs are policed very heavily, we tend to not see addiction as a disease. And we tend to try to use incarceration, especially in the U.S., try to use incarceration as a cure. But this doesn't work for the most part. So I know the Ministry of Health, they have quite a bit of information available with regards to how you deal with addiction. I know up at the Mental Health Rehab Center, the counselors and physicians who work up there have a lot to do, I know, but they have a very good understanding of how you work it, how you can do it. With cold turkey, it's impossible to say for sure. Everybody deals with things differently. I've been trying the quick sugar fry, I don't know how long. It's not working. So I think that's where the social environment becomes super important. Having people who you can have conversations with, having somebody you could call up and say, well, listen, I'm addicted to whatever it is I'm addicted to. We have a big problem here with alcohol. Being able to call up somebody and say, listen, I don't want to have a drink, can we hang out? Having a social structure that supports healthy living is super important here. It's something that we need, I think, to continue to encourage. It's something that historically we've done well with churches and with sports groups here, but there's an opportunity for us to continue working on it. Otherwise, it becomes more of a problem.
Thank you very much, John. I'm sure that answered the question quite well. Okay. So we have a very interesting question online. Please permit me to read it, John. As a teacher or parent, are there any specific signs or symptoms that may clue you into the fact that a teen is using marijuana without seeing the child or the teen actually using it or smelling it on the individual?
Again, it's a good question. I thought I had a slide, maybe with this on it. I'll see if I can find it. But there are some indications. Sorry, I just had some other slides that I was keeping around. No? No, I thought I had another slide, sorry. But the things you can look for with students who are taking drugs in general. We're talking about cannabis here, obviously, but drugs in general. We, as a parent, as a teacher, you would start looking for students who are becoming distracted, for students who are maybe slacking off, they're not performing up to the standard that you would expect for them. They're becoming distant from the education, becoming distant from the classroom. Maybe there's an early onset and they're starting to see cognitive difficulties coming with it. There's a whole list of things, I think, that can point to it. But it's hard, I think, if you don't have the physical symptoms. Like with people who are smoking a lot, you tend to have physical symptoms. You know, their red eyes and their darkened lips, and obviously the scent is something which is hard to get rid of. But it's hard without those sort of symptoms to be able to say as a teacher, okay, this person is on this drug or that one. Right? I think it's harder to say. But definitely you can sort of tell by social behavior when somebody is becoming distant from the classroom. And sometimes, a lot of times it might be because of drugs, other times it might be something else. But again, that's the point at which you need somebody to be able to speak to the child to find out, well, what's going on? You know, is there something here which we need to be concerned about? Maybe it's involving a parent, maybe it's involving some sort of mentor at the school or something. But you would start looking for students who are becoming distant and then do social investigation essentially to try to understand it.
Thank you very much again. I'm sure the viewer or the listener is satisfied with your response to their question. Any other question, please? Okay, very well. Well, I think that brings us to the end of question and answer session following the second presentation. So, I don't know if anyone else has any comments or queries, anything they would need to have clarified. Okay. So without much further ado, we'd like to bring the curtains down on today's event, this evening's event. Thank you all very much for coming, and we hope that you are truly satisfied with the information that was put forward here this evening. And we'll now like to have the vote of thanks.
Good night, everybody. And I bring apologies for Mrs. Sarifa Harper Joseph, who is the assigned person to bring the vote of thanks. So I'll just maybe start in order for parents, if I can recall. I believe the videographers were here before anybody else. So I want to thank them for taking the program live on 705. You also want Top Knowledge 705, and thank them for agreeing to air this program tonight. And in that same breath, I want to thank all the persons who are online, those who are listening to the station, and those persons who are on YouTube listening and viewing. I want to thank you all so much for joining and supporting this very important program tonight. I want to thank Mr. Millington. He offered the prayer and he led us into the singing of the national anthem. And, I think we blended beautifully. I want to thank him for being the choir director. And, of course, tonight's proceedings went so smoothly as if it was rehearsed like several times, thanks to Mrs. Tricia Deschong. I think she did a wonderful job. And she's looking so lovely. So we want to thank Mrs. Deschong for being our host tonight and for guiding us through this program and for ensuring that things went smoothly. And even though we started a little late, she ensured that we actually finished on time. Our presenters, the contributions made by our presenters tonight, I would say they're both invaluable. We want to thank Mrs. Jack. Mrs. Jack normally is not a very public person, but I think she's getting more. She getting to express her passion, and with that in mind, it forces her to become more public than she would otherwise want to be. So I want to thank Mrs. Jack for giving us that very enlightening view and overview of edibles. I saw some images that I hadn't seen before, but I've seen them, but not in relation to cannabis. And I want to thank her for bringing that information to our attention. And I'm quite sure that all of us will benefit greatly from the views and the information that she shared. And that takes us to Dr. Saville Cummings, John Saville Cummings. And I can just say thank you to him because his presentation was so detailed. It has such a wide scope, and he went far beyond what I think some of us expected in terms of the information that he shared, and it was truly beneficial. I think he gave us a lot of food for thought. And we are very grateful that he was able to share his knowledge and his expertise, and he's left us with open minds and with our thoughts flowing. And I want to thank him for his very satisfying presentation tonight. Also, we want to give recognition to the Medicinal Cannabis Authority, that unit consented to collaborating with the Pharmacy Council, also the Ministry of Health, under whose auspices we operate. And we want to thank all the other persons who contributed. I know Ms. Mingo contributed to the presentation that was done by Dr. Cummins. And lastly, but not least importantly, I want to thank every last one of you who braved the weather and you ensure that you are present in person to participate and to support this important event. So thanks for coming. I pray that when you leave, you will have no regrets. And just continue to take the message forward, spread the news, and remember what our objectives are, what our objective is. Cannabis use in teens is not to be promoted or encouraged. And finally, we have some snacks on the outside, so feel free to consume as much as your stomach can hold. I hope they have some takeaway containers. Feel free to grab one as well. And I want to wish you a pleasant rest of the night. Get home safely. May God bless you. And keep your ears tuned for the other announcement when the Pharmacy Council will have and host its next event. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of the evening. Right, so your